Please don't leave me. Please don't let me fall. If there was ever a sound that could tear a heart open, it was that cry. It echoed from deep within a canyon, sharp, trembling, choked like the sob of a child thrust out into the world. Thomas Reed, 61, a man who had lived his life in the dust and dark of the mines, froze on the narrow trail. His heart, hardened after decades underground, suddenly clenched tight. He turned. The wind howled, battering his ears with warped echoes. At first it was only the hiss of air threading through stone and the clatter of loose rock tumbling into the abyss. But then he heard it again, a faint cry, weak yet strong enough to lock his body in place. Thomas sprinted to the edge. The ground beneath him cracked and shifted, gravel sliding away as if to drag him down too. And then he saw it, a small, trembling speck. A Doberman puppy, no more than a few months old. Its body was gaunt, its front legs straining desperately against the crumbling edge, its hind legs dangling over nothing. Each time the wind lashed through, the fragile frame shook like a leaf about to break from its branch. Wide brown eyes glistened with panic. Time froze around that image. Thomas felt every beat of his heart slam against his ribs. He had seen miners trapped. He had lived through cave-ins, and he had lost a friend in the dark for being 1 second too late. But never once, had he seen such desperate, pleading eyes. He dropped to his stomach, pressing his chest to the dirt, stretching as far as he could. Still too far. The puppy writhed, claws raking over brittle soil, leaving shallow scratches. Pebbles trickled down, vanishing into the hollow below. 1 heartbeat more, and it would slip. Thomas roared, his voice a vow. "You're not going to fall. Not while I'm here." The words erupted from the deepest place in him. Not only for the pup. For himself, he was still haunted by 1987, when a fellow miner fell into the void while Thomas stood helpless. That day, he had only screamed. This time, he would not let history repeat. He inched farther, trembling hand reaching down. Wind whipped his face, shrieking like death's whistle. The pup's tiny legs slid further. It cried out, the sound breaking into silence, cut short by terror, thick as a clot in the throat. Thomas held his breath. He stretched more, his back scraping raw against the rock. His hand groped empty air. 1 stronger gust and he could tumble with it. Still, he refused to pull back. He locked on the puppy's eyes. Not just fear. It was the gaze of something cast out of the world, clinging to the last thread of hope that someone, anyone, would not turn away. In that instant, Thomas heard nothing but his heartbeat and the pounding in his skull. Grab it. Don't let go. His fingers brushed fur, short, slick, damp with sweat and grit. He clawed again, missed, reached once more. The puppy yelped, its body trembling like a snapped wire. Then, his nails hooked into the loose skin behind its shoulder. A violent pull. Dirt collapsed in an avalanche, thundering like a death drum that had missed its cue. His body pitched backward, spine slamming the rock, pain flaring sharply. But in his arms lay the trembling pup, its heart hammering erratically. Thomas clutched it tight. Its breaths were shallow, fading almost to nothing. Its eyes half closed, legs dangling limp. He squeezed harder, voice hoarse and raw. "Don't leave me. I've got you now." But under his palm, its heartbeat stuttered, then faltered. A ragged breath escaped, thin as smoke. It was slipping away. Thomas surged to his feet, the small body pressed against his chest, scanning the canyon's desolation. No one. No path. Only him and this fragile life, each second ticking like a countdown. His old pickup sat half a mile back, and he knew, if he didn't run, it would die in his hands. Gritting his teeth, he hugged the puppy tighter and hurled himself down the trail. His lungs burned, his heart hammered, but one thought pounded like a hammer with every stride. Never again. Not one more time. Thomas clutched the fragile creature to his chest, his long strides pounding the rugged trail. His breath tore from him in ragged bursts, his chest stabbing as if it might split apart. The puppy's frail body lay limp, its rib cage rising and falling in broken rhythm, each breath as fragile as smoke unraveling in the wind. Rocks slid beneath his boots. Wind shrieked past his ears. Sweat drenched his body, but he didn't stop. Every second counted. The tiny heart inside that chest was wavering on the line between life and death. At the end of the trail, his battered gray pickup waited. When Thomas flung the door open, his hands shook so violently he nearly dropped the keys. He shoved the pup into his coat, holding it tight against his chest, then twisted the ignition. The engine roared, coughing and rattling like a worn-out beast. "Don't leave me. You're not allowed to leave me yet," he muttered, one hand slamming the steering wheel. The truck lurched forward, tires shrieking against loose gravel. The road was narrow, cliff on one side, sheer drop on the other. Every sharp turn sent his heart lurching, but he couldn't slow down. Each passing second might be the pup's last. In the wavering dark, the small head rested against his arm, mouth slack, lips tinged blue. A faint whimper slipped out, so fragile it could have been imagined. Yet that sound sliced through Thomas like a blade, spurring his foot harder against the gas. The curves of Silver Canyon were notorious. But tonight, Thomas saw only one destination, Northwood Veterinary Clinic, where he had once taken his late wife's dog so many years ago. The truck jolted violently over a pothole. He heard a weak exhale from inside his coat. His eyes darted down. The puppy's eyes had shut, its chest barely rising at all. "No, not now. You're not going anywhere." His voice broke into a raw cry. His knuckles blanched as he crushed the wheel in his grip. The road stretched on endlessly, headlights slicing through the dark, tree shadows clawing across the pavement like ghostly fingers. And then, finally, he saw it, a faded wooden sign, the words Northwood Veterinary Clinic flickering into view through the night. A spark of hope. Thomas tore into the lot, braking so hard the tires screamed. He didn't bother closing the door. He scooped the pup in his arms and barreled through the glass entrance. The door slammed against the wall with a crash that shattered the silence of the waiting room. "Emergency!" "He's not breathing. He's dying." His voice cracked, raw and strangled. Inside, harsh white neon light glared, and antiseptic stung the air. Behind a desk, a silver-haired woman, Dr. Olivia Hayes, lifted her head. In one heartbeat, her eyes shifted from startled to urgent. "Get him on the table! Now!" A nurse rushed forward, guiding Thomas into the emergency room. He laid the pup onto the cold metal surface. The tiny body lay limp, legs curled tight, soaked fur clinging to sharp ribs. Olivia snapped on her gloves, her voice calm yet firm. "Oxygen. Hot towels. Prepare a low-dose adrenaline shot." Two nurses darted into motion. One strapped a tiny oxygen mask over the pup's muzzle. Another rubbed its chest vigorously with steaming towels. Olivia primed the syringe, flicked the last drop from the tip, and drove the needle into the fragile vein in its leg. Thomas pressed against the wall, his whole body trembling, eyes locked on the small form, battling for every breath. He ached to snatch it back into his arms, but his legs felt welded to the cold tile floor. 1, 2, 3 seconds. Nothing. Then, suddenly, the frail body jolted. A faint cough rattled out, weak and broken, but enough to stop the room cold. Water and dirt spewed from its mouth, Its chest fluttered, shallow but present. "He's still got a chance," Olivia said, her tone grave, but her eyes alight. "But it's razor thin." Thomas nearly collapsed. Tears streamed hot down his weathered face. He bent low, whispering through a cracked voice, "Hold on, little one. You are hope." And hope does not give up. That night, Thomas drove home in silence. No radio, no sound except the engine's low growl and the faint, uneven breaths seeping out from inside his coat. The tiny creature lay curled on the passenger seat, wrapped in the thin blanket Dr. Olivia had given him. The truck stopped in front of his old wooden cabin, nestled against the mountainside. When Thomas opened the door, the night air swept in, sharp and cutting. He bent low, clutching the pup against his chest, his broad hand trembling at every fragile breath pressed against his ribs. Inside, the fireplace had long gone cold. He hurried to rekindle it, sparks snapping into the dry wood, flaring into a streak of orange light. That glow fell across the pup's gaunt body, revealing each rib, each patch of matted fur clinging to skin. Thomas spread an old flannel blanket in front of the fire and gently set the pup down. It flinched, legs trembling as they touched the ground, then curled tight as if it wished to vanish. Its small ears twitched, shivering with every crack and pop of burning wood. He crouched, sliding a bowl of warm water closer. Firelight flickered in its half-open brown eyes, wary and tense. The pup sniffed, pulled back, then slowly stretched out its tongue to lap a sip. Just a sip, but it made Thomas's heart pound. He whispered, voice low and hoarse, as if afraid to scare it off. "Good. Drink, Hope." The name slipped out. Hope. It didn't understand, but its ears flicked, as though tucking away the strange sound in memory. Thomas fetched a small spoon of thin chicken broth. Sitting close, he offered it patiently, spoon by spoon. At first, Hope turned away, resisting, but the scent of broth, mingling with the warmth of the fire, weakened its will. A small tongue darted out, trembling, tasting. One spoon, then another. Thomas watched as though each movement was a miracle. The tiny mouth opened and closed, breaths mixing with soft slurps. A drop slid from its chin onto the blanket. Its tail twitched, so slight it was almost invisible. But he saw, and he smiled, eyes glistening. When it finished, Hope rested its head on the blanket, eyes sliding shut. Breaths still short, but steadier than that afternoon. Its fragile chest rose and fell, glowing in the firelight. Thomas sat beside it, unwilling to look away. Then, in the stillness, Hope startled. Its front legs jerked, clawing at the air as if falling. A choked whimper tore out, heavy with remembered pain. Thomas bent low, laying his rough palm gently on its back. He murmured, "It's all right. You're here now. No one's leaving you again." Hope shivered once more, then slowly eased, curling tighter into the blanket. That night, Thomas never slept. He sat in the wooden chair by the fire, his gaze fixed on the small body. From time to time, he rose, swapped warm towels, added logs, brushed his hand against a tiny paw just to be sure it was still warm, still alive. Outside, the wind howled. Mountains loomed dark under the moon. But in the cabin, for the first time in years, silence no longer felt frightening. By dawn, when the fire had burned down to embers, he saw Hope stir. It stretched slowly, lifted its head for a brief moment, its eyes fixed on the porch, distant and tense, as though waiting for something from the forest beyond. Seconds later, it curled back to sleep. Thomas sat frozen. He didn't understand. But he knew this. Hope wasn't just surviving. It was waiting, holding on to some unspoken faith strong enough to keep it alive. He whispered, half to it, half to himself. "Whoever you're waiting for, I won't let you wait alone." In those first days, Hope would not let Thomas touch him. Each time his hand drew too near, the pup's ears flattened, his body shrank tight, brown eyes wide, panic shimmering in them as if that hand might turn into the rope that dragged him over the cliff again. Thomas never forced it. He simply sat there, at a distance just far enough, placing a bowl of water, a spoon of broth nearby, and waiting. He had worked in mines all his life. He knew sometimes darkness wouldn't recede if you charged at it. The only way was patience, waiting until it faded on its own. Some nights, he heard faint sounds. Looking up, he'd see Hope creeping toward the bowl, sipping in trembling gulps, his skinny legs wobbling as though they could barely hold him. Then he'd retreat, curling back, eyes never leaving Thomas. Thomas would nod softly, whispering as if speaking to a child. "It's all right. I'll just stay here. You do what you need." He had never been a man of many words, but with this small life, whispers became a fragile thread bridging two worlds. On the third day, for the first time, Hope allowed Thomas's hand to brush lightly across his back, just a fleeting touch, before the pup startled and pulled away. Yet even so, Thomas felt the warmth of that fragile body sink into his calloused palm. He sat frozen, tears rising for reasons he could not name. Perhaps because these hands had buried too many fellow miners, had let go of his wife, had grasped only to lose. Now, they had managed to hold on to life. That afternoon, Hope sat on the porch. Golden sunlight stretched across the valley, mountain winds carrying the sharp scent of pine. He fixed his gaze on the forest beyond, ears pricked, body taut as though waiting for a signal only he could hear. Thomas stood silently behind, unwilling to intrude. He saw it clearly. That was not the gaze of a house dog. It was the gaze of one lost, abandoned, yet still believing that somewhere out there, something was waiting. Night fell. As the fire cracked inside, Thomas watched Hope curled in sleep, his legs twitching gently as if in dreams. He bent low, murmuring, "Who were you waiting for at that cliff's edge? Are you still waiting here?" Hope did not answer. He only whimpered faintly in his sleep, tail stirring as though reaching for an unseen shadow. On the fifth day came a moment Thomas would never forget. He was seated at the wooden table, carving a small piece of wood. Hope stepped forward slowly, legs shaky, but steady. He stopped at Thomas's feet, lifted his head, eyes glimmering in the firelight, and instead of fleeing as before, he lowered his cold nose gently onto Thomas's hand. Thomas swallowed hard, his vision blurred. A pup once discarded, once so afraid that even a touch drove him back, was now the one to open his heart. And he, a man who had sealed his own heart since the day he lost his wife, felt the wall inside his chest begin to crack. He whispered, voice trembling, "Thank you, Hope, for trusting me, even just a little." That night, as Thomas latched the window, he saw Hope sitting on the porch, moonlight draping his frail frame. The pup sat still, staring toward the forest, waiting. No bark, no cry, only waiting. Thomas stood motionless. He understood. This little dog was not surviving on his care alone. He was surviving on some other faith, a faith Thomas had yet to touch, a faith that kept him awake, kept him looking beyond. Tears slid down Thomas's face. He realized then, saving a life was not only giving it breath, it was learning to accept that it might still be waiting for something else, something he could never replace. That morning, Thomas opened the porch door. The spring air was still cold, mist hanging over the mountainside. He carried a steaming cup of coffee out, but his steps halted instantly. Hope was already there. On the weathered boards, damp with night dew, his thin frame sat taut, ears pricked high. His gaze was fixed on the forest, unmoving. He hadn't even noticed Thomas step outside. Thomas approached carefully, each creak of the porch boards sharp in the silence. He was about to call his name, but then he saw those eyes were filled with something he dared not break. Absolute faith. Suddenly, a sound drifted from afar, low and raspy. It was impossible to tell. Perhaps wind through the cliffs. Perhaps a wild animal. But Hope jolted. His body quivered, tail tucked, eyes blazing. He sprang up, scratching at the wood as if to leap off, then froze, head lifted toward the trees. Thomas went rigid. He had heard mine shafts collapse, rocks thundering down with friends buried beneath. But no sound had ever chilled him like the faint whimper that escaped Hope's throat. It was not pain. It was a call, a reaching back. He sat beside him, silent, resting his rough hand on the floor, waiting for Hope to come closer. But today, he didn't lean into him as before. He stood still, eyes locked on the forest. "Are you waiting? For someone out there?" Thomas whispered, his voice catching. By noon, while Thomas worked in the woodshop, he heard scratching at the door. Turning, he saw Hope pushing his head through the gap, restless. He was straining toward the forest, eyes urgent. When Thomas called his name, he hesitated, then glanced back. In that look, Thomas read something piercing. "If you can, let me go." Thomas pressed his forehead, heart clenching. He had already lost once. His wife on a storm-swept night when he couldn't get her to the hospital in time. He had buried that grief deep for years. Now, staring at Hope, he feared losing again. Yet he also knew some bonds existed long before he ever arrived. That evening, as sunlight streaked the mountains, Thomas made a choice. He tied a leash gently around Hope's neck, not pulling, only holding. Then he opened the wooden gate toward the forest. Hope stepped forward, slow but certain. He breathed deep, ears pricked. The smell of damp earth, rotting leaves, and pine sap stirred something primal in him. With every step, his frail body trembled, yet his eyes burned brighter, lit with flame. At a bend, he stopped. Before them rose the cliffside where Thomas had once saved him. Hope lowered his nose and sniffed the ground for a long time. Then he lifted his head, eyes shimmering with tears, and let out a soft, short cry. Thomas swallowed hard, sinking down beside him. His hand trembled on the pup's back as he whispered, "Was it that you didn't fall alone?" Hope buried his head in his chest, but only for seconds. Then his eyes turned outward again, silent, reaching. That night, Hope lay by the door, refusing to sleep by the fire. Thomas watched him in the flickering glow, heart aching. He realized, no matter how much love he gave, deep within Hope remained an emptiness, one reserved for someone else, lost or waiting in the dark woods. Thomas murmured, hoarse, as though confessing to himself, "If you're still waiting, then I'll wait with you." Until there's nothing left to wait for. Outside, the wind moaned, carrying back a sound like a distant call. And Hope, the pup he had named Hope, opened his eyes in the night, ears listening, gaze aching. A week passed. Hope grew stronger. He ate more, his thin legs steadying little by little. But one haunting truth remained. Each evening, as shadows stretched across the mountain, he returned to the porch, staring at the forest. No bark, no cry, only waiting. Once Thomas tried calling, "Hope, "Come in. It's cold." But he didn't move. His ears were upright, his eyes piercing through the mist toward something Thomas couldn't see. Quietly, Thomas sat beside him. In those eyes, he saw himself years ago, after losing Sarah, the wife he had loved more than life. The same empty gaze, yet one that never stopped waiting. One night, as canyon winds swept down, Hope suddenly sprang up, ears stiff. He gave a short whimper, then clawed at the door. Thomas froze. Outside, only the whistle of wind, pines clashing. But Hope shook, his body rigid, eyes ablaze. Thomas opened the door. The cold rushed in. For a heartbeat, he heard it. A sound. Not clear, but like a deep, raspy howl, echoing far within the forest. Not long, not close, but enough to raise gooseflesh. Hope growled faintly, leaping to the porch. But as his paws touched wet grass, he stopped, body trembling, feet planted. He turned back, eyes brimming, pleading, "Believe me, someone is out there." Thomas's throat closed. He too had once believed in the unseen, his wife's presence in the wind, in the scent of pine. Now Hope's eyes held that same faith, a faith strong enough to shake him. That night, Thomas did not sleep. He sat before the fire, Hope curled at his side, lifting his head often toward the window. Each time, Thomas's chest clenched. He understood. Hope wasn't just staring out of habit. He was waiting for something beyond human language. The next morning, Thomas resolved to do what he had never imagined. He pulled on his heavy coat, laced his worn boots, and reached for the leash. But before he even offered, Hope stepped forward. He allowed Thomas to fasten it, eyes blazing, body trembling not from fear but longing. They followed the trail into the woods. The wind was sharp, the ground slick with damp soil. Thomas let Hope lead. He sniffed, turned, paused, listening. Each time the wind shifted, his ears snapped forward, his whole body strung tight like a bow. At the cliff where Thomas had saved him, Hope stopped. He drew a deep breath, then lifted his head and howled. A short, trembling cry, bursting with despair and hope. Thomas stood behind, gripping the leash, heart pounding. From afar, the forest answered, a deep, hoarse howl, heavy, rising from the shadows. Not a wolf, not the wind. It carried warmth, pain, and the yearning for reunion. Hope lunged, leash straining, body quivering. He whimpered, eyes glistening, pleading, "Let me go. My mother is there." Thomas froze, hands trembling. He had kept Hope from the abyss, pulled him back from death. But now, faced with that call, he knew, if he held on tighter, he might steal away his only chance. He knelt, clutching Hope against him, whispering brokenly, "If your mother's out there, I swear I'll take you to her." Hope pressed his head to Thomas's shoulder, whimpering once, then lifted his gaze again toward the forest. His eyes burned, alive with a fire that had never gone out. Thomas rose, staring into the dense woods where the sound had come. He felt it, something waiting, a meeting, a truth, an ending, or a beginning. That afternoon, Thomas made the decision to go deeper into the forest. The sky dimmed, clouds gathered, and the wind moved through the pines like a sorrowful choir. He led Hope along a root-choked trail. His hand gripped the leash, but his heart knew. It wasn't really holding Hope anymore, only giving himself a shred of courage. Hope guided the way. Each small step seemed pulled by an invisible thread. His ears were sharp, eyes alight, body trembling with something Thomas understood at once. He was listening, calling, receiving an answer. They crossed slopes, waded through a shallow stream glinting with slippery stones. At times, Hope paused, glancing back at him, gaze asking, "Do we keep going?" And every time, Thomas nodded. He could not lie. he could not turn away. By the time the sun touched the mountain's rim, they reached a narrow gorge. The silence was so deep Thomas could hear Hope's heartbeat pounding. Then, from the shadows, a sound emerged, not a long howl, a rasping whimper, choked, like the breath of a creature worn to the edge. Hope jerked the leash, lunged forward. Thomas held on tight, then saw his eyes overflowing with what humans call blood memory longing. He let go. Hope ran, small legs flying, dust rising behind him. Thomas followed, heart hammering, each step a hammer blow. And then he saw. In a dark hollow, hidden among fallen trunks, lay a larger body, emaciated, fur in tatters. A female Doberman. Her eyes clouded with exhaustion, yet when she saw Hope, they flared like embers touched by wind. Hope howled, a strangled cry splitting the forest dusk. He hurled himself against her, burying his head in her neck, whining endlessly. The mother, trembling, still found the strength to lick his face, each touch shaky, pouring out what life she had left. Thomas stood clutching his chest, vision blurred. The sight left him breathless, a reunion without words after endless evenings of waiting on the porch. Hope had not waited in vain, but joy faltered quickly. Thomas saw the wound, deep, festering, reeking, on the mother's hind leg. She had been trapped here, surviving on instinct, but could not hold on much longer. Hope circled her, howling softly, eyes piercing Thomas in plea. He knelt, trembling hand on the mother's back. Her body burned hot, quaking with every pulse. He swallowed hard, whispering, "You waited for him. Now let me wait with you both." At that moment, the sky broke open. Rain drummed on leaves, mingling with the sobs Thomas fought to hold back. He knew he stood at a crossroads. Leave them here in darkness or take them home, toward a trial even fiercer. Hope pressed into his mother's belly, lifting his gaze at Thomas, and in those eyes was a question meant for everyone listening. Can both be saved? Thomas nodded faintly, whispering as if swearing an oath, "I will not leave anyone behind." Not one blood seeped from the mother's wound into the damp earth. Hope whimpered, a sound like weeping. Thomas pulled them both into his arms, breathing in the smell of wet fur, iron-sharp blood, and the fragile tremor of survival. He looked into the forest, where shadows swallowed the day's last light. Inside him echoed a question. Was this the end? Or only the beginning of another journey? Will Thomas save both mother and pup from the edge of despair? Will Hope keep the family he waited for so long? Do you want to hear the second part of this story? If so, leave a comment. Tell me from which city you are listening so I'll know how many hearts this small journey has reached. Have you ever knelt down to cradle a trembling life caught between life and death? Have you ever rescued an animal? And is it still beside you now? Tonight's story is not only about hope. It is about all of us, about love, about faith, and about the emptiness that can only be filled by survival itself. Thank you for staying until the very end, listening to Hope's Journey with Thomas. If this story touched your heart, please share it so others may feel it too. And tell me, do you want to walk further with Hope in Part 2? Leave a comment below. I'll see you in the next chapter, where truths hidden in the dark will come to light. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss it. Because who knows, the story you're waiting for may be the one that saves another life out there.